Hey, besties, it's Corey, and welcome back to another episode of Crafters Roundtable, the podcast where I get to sit down with individuals in the quilting, sewing, and crafting space and learn more about their insights and experiences in this wonderful world of crafting. Today's guest and I go way back, and I am super excited that she will be joining us at the table to talk about her business, her patterns, education, and so much more. But before we get started, please make sure you are subscribed to the podcast wherever you are listening or watching so you can stay up to date with everything going on here at Crafters Roundtable. So, without further ado, grab a chair, come up to the table, and join HollyAnne and I as we talk all things quilting, sewing, and crafting. Hey, Rockstar.
Hello, Rockstar. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
You are so welcome. I'm so glad you're here. It is so good to see your face. Last time I saw you, I was in another continent on a bus,
You
and
were.
we were having a fun meeting. Uh, and I have to tell you, I got an email back from Lyric after we
Mhm.
were done, and she was like, Were you seriously on a bus? I didn't believe you. I thought it was a joke." So, oh no, I was on my way to a
We
tour.
saw you briefly. You were like over in the corner, like, I'm so
I was.
sorry. I have to be on the bus.
I felt so bad that the time change didn't sync with me,
It's a lot
and
of hours to keep track of.
yes, it is, and I'm not a mathematician by any means, and it wasn't in my cards that day to figure out what the hours were, so yeah, I was curled up in the corner on the bus. It was, like, 6 in the morning there. I felt so bad. I was talking while people were sleeping still. I was like, "Well, it is what it is. You get to learn about quilting and H&H."
Here we are. I feel like if that's not real life, and as we talk, I know this is going to come out as I'm sharing about String and Story, but I'm just such a big proponent of like, this should be real life.
Fair.
And we are whole people doing whole life things. And sometimes that means we're on a bus for the meeting, and that's
It
okay.
happens. It is what it is. Everything's fine. We're fantastic.
Exactly.
But I am so excited to chat with you a little bit more today. As I was doing a deep dive on you, is
You
what.
did, by the way. These questions you sent me, I was like, you went deep into the archives.
Oh yes, ma'am. I've
I
got
mean,
people.
you were there for the archives. You were there for the terrible hair of whatever year that was. So, like,
But yeah, I was doing a deep dive, and as I was doing that, I learned a little bit more about you that didn't even know. And I want you to. I think that's where we should kind of start because that kind of starts
Yeah,
your journey. So when I was looking, you started your creative journey as a dancer and an oil painter, which
it's
is
true.
we need to get into that. But how did those artistic kind of influences like pursue you to join into the quilting space that we're in?
Absolutely. I've been creative for as long as I can remember. Like, I remember being, 5, 6 years old, and my favorite movie was Dog of Flanders, which, if you've never seen it, is this very tragically sad movie about
Yeah.
this little Dutch boy who wants to be a painter. But I would watch the whole thing for those brief scenes where, like, you got to see all the art supplies, right? And
Yeah.
I couldn't get enough. So I've been creative for as long as I can remember, had this love of color and of texture. And bless my parents, they were always so supportive when I was, in my Dog of Flanders era. I remember my dad building me an easel. Then later, when I was in middle school, my parents were like, okay, you're getting into like acrylics and oils, and those will stain the carpet. So we need you to paint like outside. So
Fair.
the attic over the garage became my art studio, but I was always complaining about the terrible light. And so one day my dad cut a hole in the side of the house and put a window in so that I could have better light up there. And I
Oh
think
my
also he
gosh.
started worrying that I was gonna like die of heat stroke in the Georgia summer up in the attic.
That will do it in the attic without the AC.
Perhaps a fair concern, right? So then I had a little like window unit. And then kind of late in elementary school, I had a bunch of friends who danced, and there was a ballet school where I went to school. And so I started dancing and discovered this love of movement that I'd always been the like play outside kid, but I'd never been the like do a actual organized active thing kid, and fell in love with dance and dance through middle school and high school. So I brought, kind of all of those through, and I did some salsa dancing in college, which was big fun, and then got into Zumba when I graduated, because where else are grown-ups supposed to go, like, find a random
Of
excuse to
of course,
dance?
it's Zumba. You got to do it.
Of
Yeah.
course, it's Zumba. Listen, Zumba at the YMCA slapped so hard circa 2013.
Hey, I am all for Zumba at the YMCA. We did Zumba at college. You got it.
It
It
was
is what it
so
is. Yeah.
good. It's so good. But, my husband and I got married, and we kind of had this crossroads of, do I go ahead and get my master's and head into traditional classroom teaching, which was the original kind of plan and trajectory, or do we go ahead and have our kids and then I can circle back on the master's thing later? And just with where we were financially at the time, et cetera, et cetera. We were like, you know what? Let's have kids now, while we're young and broke anyway. Might as well be young and broke with kids.
Might as well.
Might as well. And, I was like, my master's degree will always kind of be there later. But what I quickly found as I had my boys, not only did that lead to quite the mental health journey, which I'm sure you discovered some of as well, but it's hard to do things like dancing or oil painting when you've got little ones at home, like getting out of the house to go, down to the taco bar to go dancing in the evenings is difficult. Having
Right.
titanium white paint, which is full of lead, in the house with an infant is difficult. So I started running into these like roadblocks to these
Mhm.
creative expressions that I'd always had, and that had always been an anchor for me and always been a way to navigate some of those mental health challenges. And I found myself kind of in this desert of, I was home alone a lot while John went to work, and didn't have a lot of, creative expression at the time. I was knitting, but I was like selling things that I knit. So that wasn't purely like a hobby anymore.
Right.
Haha, as I sit now in my quilt shop. Um, and my mom just showed up one day with a box of t-shirts and said, "Why don't you Google how to make me a t-shirt quilt? You've been talking about learning how to sew. That feels like a great thing." Because sewing with knits straight out of the gate is absolutely the way to go.
I think that's
Um,
the way to start. Yeah, you
I think that,
have to.
because
Yeah.
after that, you can do anything.
Right.
But what I quickly discovered as I started researching quilting was I fell in love with the world of modern quilting, and it held a lot of the things that I loved about oil painting and about dance. That there was a lot of bold colors, there was a lot of texture, there was a lot of movement, there was a lot of self-expression happening. And I just found this whole new medium for things that had been a part of my life for a long time. And I think that those all of those qualities came into my quilting journey with me. I think that's part of why my quilts tend to be very bold, very graphic, have a lot of heavy quilting on them, is it's
Right.
got this influence from these creative expressions that came before.
I love the story. I'm a nosy person, as you could tell by the
I
questionnaire,
love it.
but I love the story. I love to hear more because, no pun intended, it builds your story. String and story. See what I did there? It
See,
builds your
exact that's why
story.
it's named String and Story, because we all have a story like this that brought us to quilting, right? And, like,
Right.
maybe it doesn't involve, like, a hole in the side of the house, but there's something that got us here.
Yeah, called a CPS, but it's fine. Everything's fine. But talk to us about, okay, so your first quilt was a t-shirt quilt. How did that experience go? Tell me everything.
Surprisingly well, actually.
Okay.
So I had a friend at the time, Meg, who handed me like a $97 Kenmore that she'd gotten at, ye old big box store 10 years previous and was no longer using. She'd upgraded to something else. And I couldn't even tell you what, because at the time I knew so little about sewing machines that I was
Right.
like, oh, look, it's a sewing machine. And I got on the interwebs, as one does, and Googled how to make a t-shirt quilt. And because I'm also and this reference has not aged well, bear with me, but because I'm Hermione Granger at heart, I also immediately went to the library
I love it.
and
I love it.
ended up with a blog on how to make rag style t-shirt quilts and a pile of Angela Walters books,
Okay.
which
Okay.
don't necessarily go together. But
No, but that's
one
fine.
helped me actually make said t-shirt quilt, and the other expanded my horizons on what was possible as I developed this new skill. And I wish I could tell you who wrote this blog, because it was fabulous. And it literally was like, cut out squares of your t-shirts and your flannel, and you're going to layer them together, and you're going to quilt a simple X across them. And then we're going to seam those puppies together, trim the seams, voila, rag style t-shirt quilt, which was exactly what I did. but
Right.
naturally with many bumps along the way. Because first of all, there was no mention of a walking foot. So I go to try to sew this knit fabric. And fortunately, I had also gone down to the big box store and bought some knits that were like cheap and on sale. And I was like, we're going to make a test quilt. But I go to try to sew this knit fabric and nonsense occurs. To which I frantically text my friend, like, why is this happening? She's like, well, you need a walking foot. I'm like, WTF is a
Well,
walking
what the
foot?
heck's a walking foot? Yeah.
It's the freaking hungry hippo of quilting. That's what it is. At least that's how I felt when I first saw one. I was like, oh, okay, we're gonna hungry hippo this through. So
Fair.
I get a walking foot. It's still not doing great. Then I learn about ballpoint needles. So literally every step of the way, I like try a thing, ruin it magnificently, and then have to ask somebody for help. And some of this at this point was even the internet. I'm on Instagram, like, does anybody know how I'm supposed to be doing this? And I discovered rotary cutters thanks to, posts online, and got a rotary cutter. And remember the background in fine art, and every like painter, drawer, sketcher, etc. has the 24-inch metal art ruler. And I was
Yes.
like, that'll be fine. Slap that puppy down with my rotary cutter. One missing side of finger later, things were in fact not fine.
Every I say everything's fine, but everything was not
It
fine.
was not
Everything was
fine.
not
There was so
fine.
much blood. My husband comes home and I'm like wrapped in paper towels, like, it won't stop bleeding. But keep in mind that we made this decision to have the children while we were young and broke. So this meant no one was going to the urgent care. He whips out the bottle of super glue that lives in the fridge that I've always been like, why is there a bottle of super glue in the fridge? He's like, for such a time as this.
For this
Cleans that
reason.
puppy and super glues it back together, and we carried on. And at which point the internet informed me that I needed a cutting ruler. Worked great. And I just kind of bumbled my way through this thing, right? And it was so like, I look back now at the kind of unbridled joy and curiosity and trial and error that came with that quilt, and all the things that went wrong. The quilt still turned out great. Like, my mom travels with this quilt to this day. It has been added on to multiple times. And I think that is the freedom and the like, something that we should all be seeking in our creativity every step of the way. No matter how many quilts we've made, like, something about that, just gonna figure it out, and it'll turn
Mhm.
out how it turns out, and I'm gonna be proud of it. And I think that's what I'm always trying to capture for my rock stars whenever I'm teaching them a new skill, especially something like free motion quilting that we tend to put so much pressure on. Of
Right.
if we can just trust that process and lose ourselves in it a little bit, even if, maybe we literally lose a bit of a finger along the way. Hopefully not. I am
Just
such
keep
a
the bottle of
stickler
super
about
glue.
really and truly, every single class I teach, I open it with the most intense lecture on rotary cutter safety you've ever heard in your life, and I inform everyone in the room where the super glue is. Like, I'm like, this is not a substitute for actual medical attention, but in case
Right.
of an emergency, it'll hold you together long enough to get medical attention.
Fair. Yeah, there were this I'm not a doctor, but we can
Right.
lock it together and we'll be on our way until we
And then
need to
we can do
get
what we
there.
need to do from there. Yep.
Exactly. I love it. I think the experiences, like you said, I think as you hit those bumps, yes, they might be, you might feel some type of way about hitting those bumps as you're going. It might be a little discouraging, but you're building your own kind of manual on kind of how
Mhm.
you're going to quilt because you're learning these
Yeah.
things as you go. I mean, because you can go to as many classes as you want. But until you get onto a machine and start working your
Mhm.
magic, or you pull out the rotary cutter and the metal art ruler, which we would not suggest, and
Please
you just
don't do
kind of
that. Please invest in a proper ruler.
and you just kind of go for it, until you start picking up those hints and those tips and those tricks through your
Mhm.
actual, workings, it's going to be a little difficult. Now, you mentioned a good thing. This is our next segue into teaching. Okay.
Mhm.
So after you took off your finger and you did the
And we
super
glued it
glue
back.
and
Yep.
we glued it back and we've been through the walking foot, the hungry hippo, all the things. How did you keep staying inspired to want to start teaching quilting? Like, how did that whole thing kind of evolve into you
Yeah.
creating this wonderful platform, that you've got?
The joke I always make, when folks walk into the store is, I quilted to navigate postpartum depression and things escalated quickly. And
Mhm.
that really is kind of what happened. So this was all almost 10 years ago, I guess about 9 years ago now. And from that first t-shirt quilt, I discovered this beautiful intersection that quilting sits at, that, I had grown up doing ballet, oil painting, and I was a lit major, which are like three of the snootiest, most elite art communities. Let's just own it,
Just
right?
put it out. Yes.
Let's just put it out there, right? There's a lot of elitism and there's elitism in every creative community and probably every community, period. But I had lived in this kind of art for art's sake, highbrow, luxury privileged space. And what I loved about quilting from the jump is that there was something so practical about it. Like, it was, you're making this beautiful thing knowing it's going to get used, it's going to get, sweat on, blood on, who knows what on, someone's going to spill the wine or the coffee.
It's gonna
And there's
happen.
this like grit to it.
Yeah.
And sitting in where I was as a new mom, that fed something in me that my other art forms I had been like invested in for so long didn't. I was living a really gritty life, right? Like, I'm nursing my kid, I'm changing diapers, I'm doing endless loads of laundry. And to have an art form that kind of met me in that space was such a beautiful thing. So my next step was simply making lots more t-shirt quilts and realizing that this was something I could do for other people, realizing what that t-shirt quilt meant to my mom, of capturing years of memories for her and like years of, ways that she had invested in her community. I wanted to be able to do that for other folks. And where I was sitting in this kind of isolation of a season, it made me feel connected to other people and like I could give back to folks that were outside the four walls of my home and not just be living in my little spiral of early motherhood. So it
Right.
started there. But as I mentioned, I had also discovered those books of Angela Walters. And this was um, right when Angela published, 4, 5, 6 books kind of in quick succession, and was making free motion quilting more accessible kind of for the first time, right? Machine quilting was finally becoming more common, more popular, more accepted. And she was doing a lot of really cool things with it and trying to drive home the point that if she could figure out long arm quilting and free motion quilting, then anybody could. And I just latched on to something in that of, it reminded me so much of the impressionist and post impressionist painters that I had grown up loving, that I wanted to be able to put that kind of texture on my quilts. And it took me a minute to figure out, you cannot do that really on a t-shirt quilt. Of course, you can do like a meander or something on a long arm, but it took me a minute
Right.
to be like, oh, I have to actually dive into this whole other side of quilting cotton and piecing and then being able to quilt it. But I couldn't wait to figure it out. And I approached that exactly the same way that I did the t-shirt quilts. Of I didn't have all the things and I didn't have all the knowledge. I literally took it one step, one tool purchase at a time. And I remember walking into a quilt shop being like, I need a free motion quilting hopping foot. And they're like, what kind of machine do you have? And I'm like, I don't know, like Kenmore, like the dishwasher. And that was not well received. This was a Bernina dealership, and that
Now
that
she
wasn't
told
well
them the
literally
dishwasher machine.
that's
Oh
literally
my
all I knew for like the reference from Kim. I was like, who knew they made sewing machines? Lots of people, just not me. Um, and like, fortunately, in spite of kind of their initial horror at my hand-me-down Kenmore, um, they had a foot. And so then I had to go home and figure out how to put the foot on and how, I didn't know to drop the feed dogs. I'm like, why is this so hard? And so then drop the feed dogs. Then I discovered that some machines you do that, it messes up your tension. Right. So it like turns into this
yes.
whole rabbit hole of as soon as I figured out and solved one thing, I had to do the next thing. And I was just doing this for the fun of it at this point
Right.
until I guess it was early 2017, 2018-ish. And I discovered Instagram Quilt Fest. And I was like, this is so great. And Instagram had just come out with the 1 minute square video, which we all thought
Yes.
was just the coolest thing. Right. And I was like, what?
Revolutionary.
Revolutionary. And I was like, what if I posted a 1 minute video every day for Instagram Quilt Fest? I was like, I just think that could be so cool. And I'd had an Etsy shop all along this way. So it as I've been doing this, there's always been a little bit of a business element to it, but it was not what String and Story has grown into now. So I was trying to grow my social media following and trying to be on the cutting edge of the thing, and just started posting these videos kind of for fun of me practicing whatever my latest free motion quilting motif was. And I was shocked that I got engagement on it. Folks had a lot of questions because at this point, I think I was on my Singer, but it was still, like a $300 Singer from Amazon. This was not like some big step up. It was a very
Right.
modest step up in sewing machine. And there was a lot of curiosity about the fact that I was putting proper size quilts through this machine, that I was doing pretty complicated quilting. And where I was as a quilter then versus how my skills have grown, of course, there's a big gap, but it was enough that folks were curious. And that I think is when that latent like teacher that has been inside me for so long started waking up. Like, remember that I had wanted to be a middle school English teacher. So I had
Right.
always thought I would be in that kind of capacity. And I thought I had laid that dream kind of to the side indefinitely. And I stumbled on this really beautiful space where I'm like, oh, if I'm figuring this out, like, of course I can just start sharing it. And again, because teaching degree, very quickly started realizing that answering one-off questions on Instagram and leading people down that trail of breadcrumbs that I had gone down was not going to be nearly as helpful as like, is there something that I can put together that I
Right.
can give all of this kind of foundational knowledge that it took me months to figure out? What kind of foot do I need? How do I get that on my machine? How do I adjust my tension? How do I make those first stitches? Um, Begin to package that into something. And along this time, I literally Googled something along the lines of like, how do I get better at social media marketing? And stumbled across Amy Porterfield's Online Marketing Made Easy podcast, which was not in fact about social media. It was about teaching online, and
Yeah.
went, oh my gosh, can I teach quilting on the internet? Keep in mind through all this, I have like 5 quilting friends. So I have very little concept of how the quilting industry works. I have very little concept of like how people learn how to quilt. I'm goofing around in the spare bedroom during nap time and answering questions on the internet, right? So I decided to try teaching intro to free motion quilting for the first time in a Facebook group. God bless it. And like, if anyone who took that very first intro class sees this, like, y'all are the real ones, because what it was so scrappy. Like, it was so scrappy. Truly, it was, you signed up, it was free. You registered with your email address. It was free. I put you in a Facebook group, and then every hour on the hour, I uploaded a video for like 8 hours. So you got like 8 15-minute lessons over the course of the thing. Of course, the uploads, we know how uploads to Facebook worked. I mean,
Right.
still work, but especially then. Of course, they crashed 85 times. They were never on time. It was a whole thing.
Of course.
But when I came up with this idea of like, let me just see if people are interested, there were kind of 2 things that happened at once. One was people being like, no one's going to learn how to free motion quilt via a video. You have to do that in person or it's not going to work. And I
Right.
was like, well, worst case scenario, it doesn't work. So let's try it.
Right.
And I remember vividly standing in the kitchen telling John, if 10 people sign up for this, I will consider it proof of concept. What I did not expect is that I had crossed paths with Bonnie Hunter earlier that year. And she, like, I mentioned that I was doing this and kind of was like, if you feel like giving it a shout out, that would be cool. Didn't really expect her to do it. Didn't really expect anyone to pay any attention. 450 signups later, we had our proof of concept.
You had proof of
And
concept.
and approving 450 people into a Facebook group is a whole job. Let me tell you what. But it made me realize that maybe this was something that on some level, my kind of blissful ignorance
Mhm.
combined with my background of painting and movement, the spatial awareness in 2 dimensions that comes from painting and
Right.
the body awareness in 3 dimensions that comes from dancing, we're combining into this really unique ability to not only figure out free motion quilting, but to put into words what you have to do with your eyes, brain, hands, and body in order to make it work. And so intro was born, and then the first cohort of free motion quilting academy came after that, and I just fell in love with teaching all over again and being able to take something that so often feels intimidating or overwhelming and infuse that joy and curiosity into it of like, worst case scenario, it's fabric and thread. Let's just see what happens.
It's literally the way you have to look at it for
Mhm.
anyone that wants to jump into free motion quilting. Worst comes to worst, it is just fabric and thread. It's going to be
Mhm.
okay. Now, granted, like you said, I did like that you mentioned whenever you were starting, and this was, I think, earlier, but whenever you were starting that t shirt quilt, you had extra scraps available, and that's what you
Mhm.
started practicing on before you
Yeah.
went to the actual quilt, because that's going to help
Yes.
build that confidence and not beat yourself
There are
down so
ways to
much.
jump in baby
Yeah.
steps.
Yes, 100%, 100%. And, like, when we're looking at, like, jumping in, but I don't think you personally I love you, but I don't think you do anything in baby steps. I think you just jump all the way in.
That's fair.
And so, like, I
Absolutely
wanna
fair.
your business, String and Story, it has grown into such an amazing store, which we'll talk in a moment, but it's become such an incredible comprehensive quilting education platform. And you mentioned that Free Motion Quilting Academy was born, and it
Mhm.
started as a modest 4-week course. And if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken, it's now at a 12-week course.
Yes, it is.
Uh, so talk to me
Yep.
about some of the like challenges and successes that you've had making kind of that change and that transformation from a 4 to a 12 week.
Yeah, that was a change that had to happen pretty early in the journey of FMQA. So the very first the very first cohort of Free Motion Quilting Academy had 5 amazing students in it, several of whom are still part of our Rockstar community, and it wasn't called Free Motion Quilting Academy, it was called Rockstar Status, because I
Okay.
really wanted to infuse into it this idea of, like, you're gonna be a quilting rock star, like, you're not just gonna know these basic motifs I taught you back in December, we're gonna go through this whole library of things. Also, keep in mind it's still happening in a Facebook group. Also, keep in mind I'm still uploading those videos into said Facebook group. And at the
Okay.
time, I was like, okay, so we're going to upload, a couple of videos a day for 4 weeks. And there that cohort went through, they graduated, and I saw in them the transformation I was hoping for, right? Like they went from uh self-describing as being nervous beginner free motion quilters and coming out the other side as confident intermediate free motion quilters. But I also saw the time commitment that it took from them. And while I had been kind of in this position of I was a stay-at-home mom, I had nap time, I had after bedtime, and doing something, as we discussed, kind of all in
Uh-huh.
worked really well for me and worked well for some of these rock stars. I also got feedback like that was really difficult to do if you've got anything else going on in life, if you're holding down a full-time job, if your caregiving involves being outside of the home more, et cetera, et cetera. And so it quickly became apparent that this needed to stretch out to allow more flexibility. Especially, heaven forbid something go wrong and someone has to go get their machine serviced in the middle of class or anything like that. So that initial change happened pretty quickly. Within a few cohorts, we had stretched it out to 12 weeks. The material itself is about half of that. And then the other half is just practice weeks. So
Okay.
now we have it so you get 2 weeks worth of curriculum back to back to kind of give this initial like jump in with both feet, get in, do the thing, and then we stretch it out so it's every other week and it becomes a little bit more relaxed. I think a little more effective. There's more opportunity to let those lessons soak in. But we've done a lot of finessing along the way too in terms of how those lessons are delivered. We went from literally, I had, Lord have mercy, it was like a tripod arm. Here, it was kind of like this. Let me see if I can, I'm not gonna be able to pull off the light. It was like a tripod arm that the phone would like clamp into,
Oh
right?
yeah. Yes.
But it was like clipped onto the side of the desk. It wasn't a tripod. So
Oh,
I
bless
had
it.
it like weirdly rigged to my sewing machine to try to minimize bounce, but it still was basically just like right in front of me like this and
Uh-huh.
would bounce as I sewed and I'm recording. So we went from
Oh,
like that iteration of videos to then at some point I realized I could get a tripod and basically straddle a tripod and at least the video was then stable.
right.
To now it's a professionally recorded course. It's gorgeous. It has multiple camera angles. It's a whole thing. And that has been phenomenal. I think one of the things that was that has been one of our challenges along the way is when we've hit seasons of growth. So for us, COVID was a time when FMQA really took off, and
Mhm.
we had our largest cohort ever in 2020. And at that time, it was me and my online business manager. We were just a team of 2 people, and we had 450 students enroll. And that ratio of 450 to 2, when it comes down to like the logistics of, we'd moved onto a course platform by then, but still making sure everyone knew how to log in, knew how to join the community, knew how to jump on when we do live Q&A videos, even being on a live Q&A and having, maybe upward of 100 people at a time trying to ask questions. That I think was simultaneously one of our most beautiful and most difficult seasons, because it was a full-time job to try to keep up with just the support our customers needed.
Of course.
And that's been something that, since then we've been able to expand the team, et cetera, et cetera. But it's been a fun journey of figuring out what works and then listening to what other courses folks have wanted us to develop and begin the process of developing those.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Yeah, I can. Have you ever gone back and looked at your early videos and been like,
Oh,
what
if
was
if
I
you go far enough
thinking?
back in my Facebook videos, I can't believe I'm admitting this very publicly, but whatever. If you scroll like way, 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 way back in the Facebook videos, there are lives of me like in a rolling chair like this with my phone, but you can only see me from here up because I'm in my pajamas and it's like 10:30 at night. And I'm like, hello, rock stars. I am here in the sewing room and I wanted to show you this thing I'm working on. And I did it as a live, but it only lasted for, like 150 seconds. Like,
Right, right. Yeah, when I was prepping some stuff for some like Throwback Thursday content, and I was like, what was I thinking? Oh my gosh. It's funny to watch kind of our own evolution in
yes.
this online space as, cameras get better and we understand what a tripod is and proper
Yep.
lighting and,
Uh-huh.
when you get the people
Exactly.
around you that know how all the things work, that makes it even better. It's quite a thing. So talk to me about, because we have this kind of thing in common. How do you balance running such a robust online platform along with managing your beautiful physical store in Duluth, Georgia?
I don't know about you, but it is the hardest thing I have ever done.
Yep.
It is the hardest thing I have ever done. And I think so the store turns 3 next week. And I feel like, thank you. We're still here.
Oh wait, I think I might have.
Uh,
Hold on, I think I might have an applause thing. Let's see.
do you have an applause thing?
I
Stop it.
might. Is it playing? Is it
Yeah,
applauding? Yeah.
that's so cute. All right, this is my new goal. I aspire to have a soundboard with sound effects. Can you imagine how intolerable I would be with a soundboard?
Child. Could you imagine both of us on H&H panel with a soundboard? I've got more. Hold on.
I
I've
think this
got
is a great
more.
idea.
This is the best. Hold on. There you go. Did you hear that? Yeah, that's
Yep,
that's
I
that's
did.
fun.
That was
Anyway,
great.
continue. Sorry.
Um, so the shop turns 3, and I feel like I did not when we opened the store, let me actually go back to the thought process that went into the 6 months before we opened the store. We were at this point where, our courses had grown, and they had grown enough that when our students needed supplies for our courses, it
Mhm.
was becoming harder and harder to know the best way to kind of send them somewhere, right? Because we've
Yeah.
got students all over the world, all over the country,
Right.
and being able to know how to encourage folks to shop local without being local to them, knowing who's going to have the thing that they need without I'm going to send them on a wild goose chase all around town.
Right.
Um, but not necessarily wanting to just point only to online stores, because I didn't want to, the whole complexity of how do I send customers to a place that's going to meet their needs, that they can, feel like they're being seen as an individual, et cetera, et cetera. And was like, what if we were able to provide kits and things like that to our customers for the things that we are putting on? And really wanting to meet this need and solve a pain point and a friction point that we were seeing. So that ended up being the store. Originally, it was kind of an online offering. And then the space that has become our store is actually the studio that I took oil painting classes in when I was pregnant with my son.
Oh my gosh.
So Pam and Larry Smith had Two Smith Art Gallery here, and I used to come on Thursday mornings and do oil painting classes with them. And we had, after COVID, I had hired a person locally to help as we were starting to do some online orders and online, product offerings. And so we had a space across the way, and Pam and Larry announced that they were retiring. And I literally wandered in because, like you, I like to be nosy. And I was like,
Mhm.
it's a small town. Let me just go see what's going on over here. And I come in, and Pam, at all of 5 foot even, looks up at me, and because I was like, who's moving in? And she goes, you are. And I'm like, come again?
One more time?
And yeah, and Pam in her, like mother of Duluth art scene energy looks at me and is like, "You're gonna open a store." Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, I am.
I
Yep.
say less.
In
Done.
that moment, it was like that is the next step. And that's a way that I want to, invest in this community, etc. What I didn't know at the time, because I was only thinking of two things. I was thinking of I love Duluth and I love the idea of being more rooted here. And I'm struggling to meet the needs of my online customers for the physical products they need to take my classes. Oh, look, I can do both of these things at the same time.
Right.
And I stand by that vision, and I think it was a beautiful vision. There was also this missing piece of I didn't realize how much energy it would pull away from some of what we do online to start this thing, right?
Correct.
And so
Yeah.
I feel like as we are hitting year 3, I am just now circling back around to putting all of the energy and love fully back into our online spaces the way that I so delighted in doing in our earlier years. And it it makes me really excited to feel like I'm finally kind of learning how to balance those things because I've missed it. And I feel like we've asked so much of our online rock stars to be patient with us in this season that we've been in. And it's exciting to finally feel like we're hitting our flow because it's just been so difficult. As far as the pragmatics of it look, obviously the team has grown. I am not the only person in here. We've got Team Rockstar here locally. But we also keep our hours super limited. We're only open Thursday, Friday, Saturday afternoons because I'm doing things like this on other days of the week, or I'm live on our channels, or we're shipping out online orders, or I'm long arming and doing things that it's just much more difficult to do if people are coming in and out of the space.
Right.
So, um, yeah, all that to say, it's still a work in progress. I feel like I've come a long way in knowing how to balance it. I'm sure I will continue to learn more lessons as we go along.
Oh, it's always a work in progress. Like, listen, we had our 20th anniversary this year, and it's thank you. It is still to this day a work in progress, and finding time to split between my online self and my I have to run a business self is it's a lot because
Yeah,
it pulls on your creative strings too because it's
it
just like
does.
I don't where do I put my it's like oh, I wanna work on that and I wanna film that, but it's like, golly, I've gotta deal with budgets, I've gotta do this, I've gotta do that, and, paying the bills kind of trumps some things sometimes,
I
and
understand. Yeah.
and it's like getting that kinda thing done, but I do wanna talk about the amount of rock stars that you have. I did some statistics because again, I have
Yep.
people. From what I could find, and I'm sure it's grown since then, but you've taught
Mhm.
over 20,000 people
Mhm.
worldwide. You've got over 20,000 little rock stars out there.
Yep.
How does that feel? Like what is that I just I can I'm getting tingles thinking
It
about it. Like it's just
it's
lovely.
wild, like, when I really stop and think about it, and, like, I'm gonna put this in the context that I grew up with, right? We were not a big sports watching family growing up, but I grew up at a mega church, and our, auditorium held 2,500 people, and when I think of, like, the number of rock stars, the ratio of the number of rock stars to that room, it blows my mind every time, and I'm so grateful that so many people have found value in what we offer here at String and Story. I'm so grateful to get to be a part of that many quilts and journeys and all of the things, right? All those stories, right? That's the whole idea with String and Story of like to get to be a part of all those stories. And it's also so astonishing. I think about we did a road trip a few summers ago and we had gone up to Seattle and spent a few days with one of my best friends. And then we were driving down into Idaho to meet up with my parents because we did states tours growing up. So I've been to 49 of 50 state capitals, and we are meeting my parents outside of Boise to check off Idaho. And we were driving through this, just kind of like rural region of Oregon and Idaho. And I made this kind of like passing comment to Hubster about like, how cool is it to think that like, I know I have rock stars that live like nearish here.
Yeah.
And like that String and Story has been able to touch lives, even across the country, across the world. And on a whim, I literally like took a picture of the exit we were driving by and posted it and was like, on a road trip. And I had like 3 people immediately DM me and be like, oh my gosh, you're next to so-and-so's house. I'm like,
I love it.
this is amazing. And I just, that, lonely, struggling, isolated young mom, HollyAnne, was able to, first of all, learn how to quilt via the internet, but then get connected to so many amazing humans. And I think about the personal journey that has been of like not just meeting other quilters, but getting to know their broader stories,
Mhm,
and the way that has challenged me to grow as a person and to see more perspectives outside of just my lived experience
mhm.
has been gorgeous.
Yeah, I can totally agree. It's a wonderful thing to know that you've helped somebody, but then when they because as quilters, sewers, crafters, all of us, we like to talk. We just do. Whether you
Uh-huh.
think you don't or you do, you like to talk, and that's fine.
Uh-huh.
'Cause that's what we're here for.
Yes.
But to sit down and like listen to like sometimes like for instance, your one of your Free Motion Quilting Academy videos might have pulled them out of one of the darkest times that they've been in,
Mhm.
or I had someone flag me down that watches us in Brazil that's helped her get through something. Like
Mhm.
it's a great feeling to know that we're making a difference just by sharing the thing that we love.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely, and I think about how, and I was talking about this with my team recently, that, when the COVID shutdowns happened, that was, like, the first conversation that Clara and I had was, "How are we offering more videos?" Because similar to that experience of having been kind of in the rural Western US and be like, "I know there's rock stars out here," also realizing that part of what comes with living in a more rural area is isolation.
mhm,
And, just thinking a lot about how during the shutdowns, folks weren't just like 6 feet away from people. Sometimes they were 6 miles away from people.
yeah,
And we had a lot of conversations as a community of, if I was live, that I might be the only person they saw and talked to that day.
right.
And being able to do that together, what what an honor, honestly, to get to be the person who got to be their little, COVID group, if you
Yeah,
will.
yeah. No, I totally hear it. I wanna switch gears. Um,
Mhm.
when we saw each other at QuiltCon, which was
Mhm.
quite the experience, as it always is, QuiltCon ended with Holly Ann doing chair races down the aisles, but
Mhm.
that's fine, everything's fine, we're fine.
Mhm.
I
There's a high likelihood of that repeating at H&H, so
I'm
be prepared to join in.
I'm here for it. We're going to do it, we're going to film it, it's going to be a thing.
It's gonna be
Um,
great.
but when I walked through your booth, I got to look at some of your patterns up close, and
Mhm.
I've actually got one that I purchased right here, the Perfect Fit
Yay!
quilt pattern. I love this pattern; it is so cute. But I want to talk about like how did you get into designing quilt patterns? Like, kind of
Mhm.
what was that? I think I want to do this, and I'm going to attempt. Well, I'm just going to jump in full front because that's what you do. I'm just going to jump into the deep end and figure it out. Then like talk to me about that, but also like what role does as you've increased
Mhm.
the technology that we have, through all
Mhm.
your different things, like how does that like full circle role kind of blended everything together to create all of these beautiful patterns that you've got?
Absolutely. So it's interesting because I think my journey with pattern design has been one of my more fraught relationships of all the things that I do. And that is partially because quilt pattern design sits squarely at the intersection of art and math. Like it's very geometrical, there's a lot going on there. And that kind of attention to detail is very difficult for my brain. So I started quilt pattern. The Perfect Fit was actually my first pattern that was published, and way back in the day. And at the time, I started designing because it felt like the thing to do. Like, I wish I had like a more inspiring story about that side of things. But at the time, it was I'm doing this online free motion quilting teaching thing. I'm getting a lot of feedback if people are not sure that anyone's ever going to want to learn online. Well, I could also design quilt patterns. And um, I enjoyed it for the few years that I was doing it kind of pre-COVID, and released a, half dozen or so patterns. And then it was the thing that really got dropped when we saw that increase of people taking classes online and everything, and we were caught up with that. And is something that I've recently returned to. And I'm so thankful for the ways not only that we have the opportunity to lift each other up as like the way that we can lift our customers up, but also how we within the industry can encourage each other. Cause it actually took Brittany over at Lo and Behold kind of putting her hands on my shoulders and being like, I like your quilt patterns. Will you please re-release them and start designing again? And I admire her work like to the moon and back. And that meant a lot, that like word of encouragement. So we've been going through and we've been kind of revamping and re-releasing, rechecking all my math because I don't have, postpartum brain anymore. So I can do a better job with the
Right.
math. And it is easier now with all this technology. And it's been fun to learn yet another way of storytelling that, each of these patterns that I've released, has its own little story behind it. And, Perfect Fit was one that I had kind of seen this graphic as like the background of a slide somewhere along the way.
Mhm.
And it just, and it wasn't what became Perfect Fit, but it was that kind of idea of like interlocking shapes. And I was like, oh, that would be a cool quilt pattern. And so Perfect Fit got to be this really fun collaboration actually between my husband and I, because I could draw what I wanted it to look like, but I couldn't figure out the pattern repeat. And he has a background in engineering. So it literally took his little engineering brain going in and being like, here's the block. I was like, thank God.
Somebody found it. Thank you.
Somebody found it. And, that was kind of where the name came from, of like the way that our skills were able to complement each other, like in that design process. But now, yeah, technology is a huge part of what we do with design. I, of course, use EQA. Most of my designs start on graph paper because please see background in art and literature, and I'm a tactile person. So it usually starts on graph paper. Things get drafted up in EQ8 from there. Then we're back to graph paper for lots and lots of math because that's how my brain works. And then we love using tools like Pre-Quilt to be able to make it so that we can digitally color things, and you can digitally color things to pick out fabrics, and see all the mock-ups until, they go to print. And, huzzah for supporting, woman-owned businesses. Canva is an incredible tool for laying out our quilt patterns. So yeah, so String and Story is a quilting education company. It is also so tech heavy. Like, no, I'm
I
sure like
I
you
know. I
understand the
know. Yeah.
tech that is behind the scenes of like, here is my beautiful fabric creation. You have no idea the wires that are behind it.
How many different subscriptions it took to get here.
The tech stack is unbelievable. I sat down today and we use StreamYard for when I'm doing like broadcasts, and
Yeah.
I needed to log into StreamYard to broadcast onto YouTube this morning. And I sat down and I was like, I'm going to remember the name of this software. It's going to take me a minute. And I literally like got up and did a thing. And it was like in the middle of the thing that my brain was kind of like, it's StreamYard, HollyAnne. I was like, oh, thank God. We made it through the Rolodex.
Girl,
Like,
if you could only see my bookmark view right now, like when I click, it's all the different things we use
I
to
think I have
build.
40 tabs
Oh,
open.
yeah,
So,
all the time. Oh, all the
yeah.
time. It's a thing. Yeah, totally. So, as you're like always building all of these incredible patterns, what like fuels you to stay inspired to create? Because I can
Yeah.
only imagine, like, as a pattern designer, I know there's infinite ways you can design a quilt, but as you're like looking around, it's like, okay, it might look like this person's. Oh, it might look like this person's. I don't feel like I want to write anything. Like, how are you staying fueled up to keep going and creating that perfect fit?
Yeah, absolutely. So Perfect Fit is a unique one that especially with how geometric it is, that it kind of came from technology and filtered through some technology to become a quilt pattern.
Right.
A lot of my patterns, there is um some other nerdy inspiration behind them, right? So one of my favorite ways to stay creative, not only with pattern design, but with all of the things that I do as far as being energized to get on a live, for coming up with new, quilting plans when I'm going to quilt something for a customer or for myself, all of those is actually deep diving into things that are wildly unrelated to quilting, so that I can pull from lots of different ways. So
Why am I
I'm
not surprised?
right. So we've already established that I'm like an art nerd, a lit nerd. So there's a lot of things that come from those. Um, Star Island was born out of my children's obsession with Moana, and thinking about kind of that picture of uh, how do we navigate life, right? And that idea of navigating life by the stars, like you might with a compass,
Right.
but also literally a lantern that just lights the next step. And how one of the key themes, like in that storyline, is she only ever knew the next right step. And like, how much is that like life, right?
Right.
So, random things from life, but I'm also a huge science nerd. Like my friends routinely are like, if HollyAnne's ever like reborn into another life, she's going to be a marine biologist and like study sharks. Facts. I'm like, that sounds great. Let's do it. Put me on a boat in a scuba suit. And so I'm a runner, I'm a marathoner. And so I love being able to deep dive into these other areas of life that seemingly have nothing to do with quilting, but get me thinking about what are the common threads, those common stories, again, that connect us, stories of resilience, stories of navigating difficult times, stories of celebrating family or friends or other loved ones. And how can I translate those into fabric
Yeah.
in via geometry?
Mathematician. Here we go. Here we go. Um,
Fortunately, I had a really wonderful geometry teacher at school. Like, shout out to Kim Lowenthal. She changed my life, set me up to succeed at quilting. Who knew?
yeah, it's yeah, I had a good geometry is I had a great geometry teacher too, Brandy Jumper, holla.
Woohoo!
Like, yeah, you know when you've got a really good teacher, you just keep them locked in. So yeah, it
Yep.
definitely does help. So, speaking of teachers as yourself, how what are some things that you would give to somebody or tell somebody that is hesitant to get into free motion quilting, for instance?
Absolutely. There are a few things that I love to remind folks of. The first we already touched on at the very beginning of this conversation, which is that idea that at the end of the day, it's fabric and thread. And yes, it is absolutely, especially by the time you get to a pieced quilt top, it is something that you have put a lot of time and love and care and energy into. But we don't have to start quilting on this, right? We can start on a scrap piece of fabric. I love to recommend like get some like muslin on sale and make some practice sandwiches and take some of that emotional pressure out of it.
Hmm.
Find a way to practice that you can treat your practice sandwiches the way that my kids treat a fresh ream of printer paper, right? Like they've got a fresh box of markers and a fresh ream of printer paper, and Lord have mercy, I'm not going to see my floor for 2 straight weeks.
Right.
But there's that beauty in what we've talked about, that curiosity, and how can we awaken that curiosity?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing that I love to challenge folks with is like, can we get back to that kind of childhood joy? We call it joy units, like chase the joy units. On the other hand, we can look at this very cerebrally, right? And that is that free motion quilting at the end of the day is a fine motor skill. And it is actually a lot like handwriting, which, at the risk of triggering us all, like third grade, the lined paper, how many H's and C's and, every letter of the alphabet, how many repetitions did we have to do until things like being able to write became automatic for us?
Yeah.
And the great thing is because, 99.9% of the time my students, are literate and have learned how to write. They've already wired a lot of that in their brain, and we can literally piggyback on those skills. That's one of neuroscience is another thing I tend to nerd out on. But that's one of the things that the human brain does really well is if you have the scaffolding of adjacent skill sets,
Yeah.
plugging in something that is close but not quite the same can be a lot easier than we think it is. So taking those two things together, right? You have already mastered a skill that is actually quite similar to what we're about to do. It is a fixed number of shapes put together in a bunch of different ways to make these quilting motifs, combined with how can we make this playful? How can we make it fun? How can we take some of that emotional pressure out of it? Because at the end of the day, we're here to quilt for those joy units. And if the quilting is the thing that's raising our blood pressure, like we're doing something wrong. And our inclination sometimes is to go, oh, learning a new thing is hard and scary. I'm going to quit the thing.
Yeah.
But we can also flip that script and say, why am I treating it so hard and scary? Right? Think about when we were all kids learning how to walk. We would stand up and then we would promptly fall on our butts. And what did everyone do? They cheered and clapped because
Yep.
we tried. And how can we give ourselves permission as grown-ups to go back to that same energy of like, my only job here is to show up and try and enjoy the process. And
Yeah.
the rest is going to take care of itself. If we try to strong arm our way through learning a new skill, it takes 100 or more repetitions for it to click.
Yeah.
If we can make it playful and fun, our brains will latch onto a new skill in about 5 repetitions. It's huge. Right?
Okay. Okay.
That sounds a whole lot less scary, right? I gotta
What's
just have a good
easier?
time 5 times.
Yeah, and then I'll be good to go. I got it. I'm
Mhm.
done. Sold.
Yeah. This is part of why too, like when I'm teaching, and you heard some of the demos that I gave at QuiltCon. So when I teach, I'm a goofball because we gotta just take some of the pressure out. Like it's just fabric.
Right.
Come on,
We're
and
gonna
it's
have
fabric that
fun.
we're infusing a lot of meaning into.
Yeah.
But why not infuse some joy along the way too?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I think, like you said, let's go back to some of those earlier years where, everybody's childhood was different. But when you think about like, take yourself back, like when you're learning a new skill, take yourself back to a time before the world got you down, and then
Mhm.
you'll be good to go. Like you said, that childhood joy that nothing is
Mhm.
stopping you. You're going to jump off that ledge and everything's going to be fine because, it's snow at the bottom of that 10-foot ledge. It's fine.
Exactly.
Everything's fine.
What could
Um,
possibly go wrong?
what could go wrong?
But also think of all the times we did stuff like that and somehow it didn't go wrong, right? Like,
I still question how I got here today sometimes because, yeah, there
listen,
were
surviving the 90s was a ride. It was a ride.
to say the least, to say the least. So, all right. So last thing I want to chat about is where does actually let's roll back to the beginning of the conversation and then we'll come
Mhm.
to last thing we'll talk about. So the beginning of the conversation when you started your whole quilting, sewing, crafting, creative journey.
Yeah.
There was a reason for that. That was past HollyAnne. Now we're at
Yep.
current HollyAnne. Where does current HollyAnne see future HollyAnne going with String and Story with this education platform? What are kind of some of those goals that you'd like to set for yourself on the public platform out here that's going to live forever on the internet?
Absolutely. Someday this will be the video we go back to and we cringe as we repost it for
Yes,
Throwback Thursday.
yes.
And yet I'm a firm believer that if that's not the case, then we're not growing enough, right? Like
Right,
there's a part of me that I look back at old videos and I'm like, but I'm also like, look how far we've grown. Look at
right.
all the places that we've come from and where we are now. I'm so excited to, as I mentioned, be kind of back in this brain space after 3 years of kind of establishing the shop and learning how retail works and learning how e-commerce works, to be throwing more energy back behind our courses and my patterns than I've been able to for these last 3 years. That's really where my heart is. And I love that you have continually referred to String and Story as an online quilting education platform because that's our heart. Like that's what I'm here for, is to help people grow in their skills and in their joy units. So I look forward to that growing more. I've got a few noodling ideas for possible future courses. I know, we're almost through the revamping of kind of existing String and Story patterns. I think this year will kind of be the final push of re-releasing patterns that pre-COVID HollyAnne wrote with postpartum brain, that now I know a lot more about quilt construction, a lot more about quilt math, and we're getting those back out into the world. And I look forward to having new patterns come out. And my kids are finally at an age that I'm getting to do things like travel to teach a lot more. And
Yeah.
it's really fun to get to see people in person and actually share those stories in real time.
I love it, and I can't wait to see all of these new collabs and these new patterns and these new things as they release. Now, for those listening or those watching, we have yet to do a PR stunt, a name drop. How do they find out about you and String and Story? What are kind of all the places to look
Absolutely.
for you?
I am String and Story everywhere. So stringandstory.com is going to be the central hub for all the things. I routinely thank the Squarespace gods for continuing to support our giant website because there's a lot of pages on it at this point. There's over 350 educational blogs there, in addition to all the resources about our quilt-alongs, our courses, and all of that. So that's going to be your central kind of hub for String and Story life, if you will. But then at String and Story on Instagram, YouTube, Threads, Facebook, Pinterest, connect with us. I'm super active on Instagram, especially. I'm always, acting a fool for the camera. Come enjoy my combination of ridiculous commentary and inspirational speeches because it's always somewhere in the middle.
It's always a little bit of a mix with
There's
HollyAnne and
always a
String
little
Story.
something there, right? Yeah, and we are doing quarterly enrollments right now for our courses. So if, hearing about these classes has you wanting to jump in and learn how to free motion quilt, you can start right now with Intro to Free Motion Quilting. It is no longer in a Facebook group. It is, just $35 tuition, or our larger courses are enrolling quarterly. So there's some great opportunities to connect.
Fantastic. Well, I will make sure I link all of that stuff in the description below, so then people can easily hop over to that. But HollyAnne, thank you so much for spending some time with me
Yes.
today. I love hanging out with you, and I can't
I
wait to
love that
see
our
where this
paths
goes.
have crossed again
I
after all
know.
these years. It's so great.
It is absolutely wonderful. So again, I can't wait to see you at H&H, and I'll talk to you later.
Yes. I'll see you then.
All right, bye.
Bye.
All right, guys, that was our wonderful podcast with HollyAnne Knight of String and Story. We got to learn so much more about her story and what brought her to where she is today. If you're looking for that educational content that she talked about, be sure to find that in the description below. Hop over and follow her and all of her quirks and quirls. And we love her so much. And I am so excited that you got to join her and me at the table today and learn more about String and Story. I'll see you next time here at Crafters Roundtable. Bye.